Across nearly 3 decades, a predator with a sinister obsession inflicted brutality upon women and mutilated their bodies in pursuit of twisted gratification. Had it not been for one victim's desperate call, perhaps the perpetrator might have remained elusive. While she lost her life, her 911 call would bring an investigation, which would uncover many other bodies. The ruthless assailant would go down in history as the Long Island perpetrator. Here is a timeline of the series of events that led to this name. 2 hunters were tracking game in a heavily wooded area in Southampton, New York, on November 21, 1993. As they neared 50 Old Fish Cove Road, they discovered something strange. It was a body, only partially clothed in the forest. It appeared to have been lying in the forest for at least 2 days. Authorities reached the site and tried to identify her by her clothes. The medical examiner confirmed 2 things. The 28-year-old had been brutally strangled. There was also evidence that she had been taken advantage of and then slain in a lustful rage. Once the fingerprints were analyzed, they were able to inform her loved ones. It was Sandra Costilla. Her fingerprints had been added to the database when she was arrested the previous year for jumping a subway turnstile. During the autopsy, the examiner was able to lift 3 strands of hair from her body that did not belong to her and were possibly her assailants. An autopsy indicated she had over 25 blows and injuries, which were sharp force trauma inflicted on her body once she had lost her life. Her face and torso were brutally affected by the slashes. Originally from Trinidad and Tobago, Sandra had been living in New York City. She was like a nomad with no permanent address. Her last address on record was in Queens, but she was not living there when she lost her life. There were rumors that she was an escort, but that was never confirmed. Authorities implied her lifestyle was a bit similar, since she would take money, favors, and presents in exchange for her company. There were not many leads to go on, but about 8 years later, in 2001, the Suffolk County prosecutors announced a connection to John Bittrolff. Bittrolff was a carpenter in the area convicted of taking the lives of 2 women whose bodies were recovered in the same part of Long Island. But he was not charged as there was a lack of evidence. The case stayed in the files on the shelves and there was not much to go on. A decade after Sandra disappeared, Manorville was in the news again. This time, a dismembered torso of a woman had been washed ashore on the beach. A woman was walking her dog along the shore when she came across the unclothed and dismembered body. She was decapitated and missing her hands, and had a severely mutilated tattoo on her back. The tattoo was a couple of cherries, and it appeared the perpetrator tried to cut it out with a knife. But mutilating the tattoo was unsuccessful. The medical examiner was able to reconstruct the words, and that led to the identification of the body as belonging to Jessica Taylor, a 20-year-old escort. According to her mother, Elizabeth Boschgill, family was everything to Jessica. She loved to play with her 2 brothers, and she was always one to cuddle up on the couch with her mother. It was not possible for her to miss her mother's birthday, so when she did not show up for the birthday party, her family immediately knew something was terribly wrong. The tattoo that led to her identification read Remy's Angel. Remy was a man named Khalil White who knew Jessica personally. Khalil was alternately described as Jessica's pimp and boyfriend. He claimed she would have been working in Queens. She was last seen working in Manhattan, according to other reports and witnesses. But Khalil White was adamant that Jessica would have been working elsewhere. Born in New York City in 1984, Jessica fell into hard times and became an escort. According to police reports, she was on record for being arrested in Atlantic City and Washington, D.C. Eventually, after moving to New York, a month before her demise, she was arrested in the Big Apple as well. She had been working the streets near the Port Authority bus terminal between July 18th and 21st, an area once known as the Minnesota Strip. This stretch of 8th Avenue between 42nd and 57th Streets was notorious in the 1970s for its high activity related to prostitution. This was after Minnesota passed strict anti-prostitution laws, prompting many women to move to New York City. During that period, the punk rock band The Dictators wrote a song called The Minnesota Strip. The strip is hopping on Friday night. They come from so far away. Talking about young girls from all over the country coming to the big city with big dreams only to turn tricks on the streets. There was not much information available when they looked for the perpetrator. Shannon Gilbert disappeared on May 1, 2010, after visiting a client she met on Craigslist in the gated community of Oak Beach on Long Island, New York. The night she vanished, she made a haunting call to 911. "There is somebody after me," she told an operator before fleeing from the client's home at around 5 a.m. "Somebody is after me, please." Her disappearance prompted a search, which led to the discovery of 4 bodies. During the winter of 2010, another body was recovered within the Manorville area. It was the body of Melissa Barthélemy, an escort who went missing 3 years before in 2007. The officer who discovered her body did not realize what was in store. Just a couple of days after this gruesome discovery, 3 other call girls were found deceased within a quarter-mile span, 500 feet apart from each other. All the victims had advertised their services on Craigslist and were in their 20s. Megan Waterman was from Maine. She left the Holiday Inn to meet a client on Long Island and was never heard from again. The second victim, Amber Lynn Costello, was from North Babylon. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was from Connecticut. They were all working in New York. Aside from this fact, there was nothing to connect them. Authorities finally labeled these incidents as slayings and suspected the presence of a possible serial assailant. The 4 latest slaying victims were named the Gilgo Four. Despite extensive investigations, no suspects were publicly named in any of the cases. On March 29, 2011, police discovered a skull, forearm, and hands during an investigation at Gilgo Beach. They were the missing body parts of Jessica Taylor, whose torso was found in Manorville in 2003. Detectives came together to work on the case. These cases were then linked to the Long Island perpetrator. Many other cases were ruled out since it did not seem to follow a particular pattern. The key piece of evidence collected over the years was a black leather belt. The initials HM were embossed into the belt. Some read it as RM or even RH. A decade rolled by. In February 2022, authorities established a task force comprising local, state, and federal investigators. They primarily focused on cell phone data records, analyzing all the numbers called by the victims or who called on the victims' phones in their final days. Friends, family, and loved ones were thoroughly vetted. Their investigation led them to one common suspect and 2 key locations: Midtown Manhattan and Massapequa Park. Whoever the perpetrator was, he operated in these 2 areas. Disposing of the bodies in the ocean resulted in them washing ashore in the tide, something he had not anticipated. 1 month later, the task force made a breakthrough. Amber Lynn Costello, the woman whose remains were found in 2010's roommate, Dave Schaller, recalled seeing a Chevrolet Avalanche parked outside their home the day before she disappeared. Amber was last seen with a client on September 2, 2010. It was a tall man with oval glasses. Dave recounted coming home to find Amber hiding in the bathroom while a large man threatened her. He said the man was large, like Frankenstein. He then confronted the man, leading to a physical altercation that forced the man to leave in his truck. The next day, other witnesses reported seeing a similar truck shortly after Amber left to meet her client. Dave said this man was the first person he thought of when he heard about Amber's case. For 13 years, that face and truck never left his mind. This would prove to be an important lead. The task force that was investigating these disappearances and slayings obtained the registration history of this truck. The distinctive dark green Chevrolet Avalanche was traced to one person who fit the description of the Long Island perpetrator, a 59-year-old architect named Rex Heuermann. When authorities investigated further, it came as a surprise that Dave's description of the assailant was not further traced back to the owner, because he checked all the boxes. The description was simply set aside in a case file and never investigated. Everything about Rex Heuermann's movements incriminated him. His cell phone pings were near Midtown Manhattan, near his office located at 5th Avenue and 36th Street. The second location of pings was Avenue Massapequa Park, which was where Herman lived. Further investigation in July 2022 would bring out some interesting details. Officers discreetly went through the trash cans outside Heuermann's home. The trash cans held 11 mysterious bottles, but these very bottles held crucial DNA evidence that would decide the fate of the Long Island victims. This DNA evidence was compared to the hair lifted from Sandra Costilla and Megan Waterman's bodies. Surprisingly, it did not just point at Rex Heuermann. The DNA also belonged to his wife. She was cleared once investigators realized that she was out of state each time one of the Gilgo Beach tragedies would have occurred. But how did her DNA end up with the victims? There was another lead when detectives made another discovery from pizza crusts that Rex Heuermann discarded in his trash. Plainclothes detectives had been following Rex Heuermann, waiting for him to hand them some form of evidence so that he could be arrested. And he delivered it in a box, quite literally. While he was under surveillance, officers saw him throw a pizza box into a sidewalk garbage can outside his office building. The Suffolk County Crime Laboratory collected the discarded crusts and tested them for DNA. Investigators then went through Heuermann's internet history, which revealed dark obsessions. There were over 200 searches regarding the Gilgo Four. Heuermann had gone deeper, looking up pictures of the grieving families of the victims. Some of the searches were obvious. Why could law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial perpetrator? Why has the Long Island serial perpetrator not been caught? And new phone technology may be key to break-in case. He was deeply involved in this case. He had looked up podcasts and documentaries regarding the four famous victims. He even searched about the 2022 task force that was created to fish him out. This was ironic, considering they were zeroing in on him, simultaneously uncovering information about him. Investigators proved that he used burner phones to call up escort services and had a separate email account for soliciting street workers online via Craigslist. The Google warrant was obtained in secrecy so that Heuermann would not be alerted to the investigations or how close he was to the grasp of the law. His email accounts were used to watch some disturbing, macabre forms of adult films. They were mostly torture films of women and children being abused in all ways possible. He even used this account to exchange selfies with future intimate companions. Further investigations uncovered additional suspicious details that, although not directly related to the case, provided insight into his background. From 2014 to 2022, Heuermann initiated 4 lawsuits in New York courts against drivers. He alleged severe and permanent injuries from car accidents, according to court records. 3 of these cases were resolved through settlements or discontinuation, while the most recent one remained ongoing. During an April 2018 deposition for one of the cases, Huerman shared information about his personal and professional life. He stated that he still lived in his childhood home in Massapequa Park, Long Island, with his wife of 22 years, daughter, and stepson. When asked about sports, he mentioned that his only competitive activity was rifle shooting. As a gun enthusiast, Huerman possessed an impressive collection of firearms. Huerman had also defaulted on taxes for over a decade. Nassau County records show that he was served with 6 tax liens that were filed by the IRS between 2010 and 2021. His tax debt exceeded $425,000. Police began compiling evidence to build a case against him and arrest him. Who is Rex Huerman? An architect originally from Manhattan, Huerman attended Alfred G. Berner High School while living in the same house in Massapequa Park. His house was poorly supported by bare wood. There was even grass on the roof and faded shingles. The yard was always messy, sticking out like a sore thumb amongst the neat homes on the rest of the block. The working-class suburb was an hour's drive from Midtown Manhattan, where he would work later on. Rex Huerman's father was an aerospace engineer who helped build satellites at work. He was a wood enthusiast and crafted furniture at a workshop in his house. He was married to Asa Ellerup in the very same house. Asa had a son with special needs, whom Huerman raised as his own. The couple also had a daughter together. An architectural consultant in Manhattan since 1987, Rex Huerman worked on significant projects with the city, at JFK Airport, and for notable clients such as Cipriani. Steve Kromberg, a property manager who worked with Huerman for 30 years, described him as a big, goofy guy, a little bit on the nerdy side. In contrast, others like Nicholas Fershaw, a neighbor, characterized Huerman as creepy and unapproachable, someone who seemed to lurk in the shadows. Neighbors also said that they always avoided his house on Halloween, advising their children to stay away because he was not very welcoming to trick-or-treaters. Huerman was known as an average man who followed a daily routine, heading to the Massapequa Park station dressed in a suit and carrying a briefcase. According to a neighbor named Barry Auslander, Huerman appeared to be a typical businessman, someone who blended in without drawing suspicion. He was neither exceptionally charismatic nor particularly unpleasant. Huerman was the president of an architectural firm he founded in 1994, RH Consultants and Associates, where his daughter, Victoria Huerman, was also employed. The firm is reputable, with clients including Catholic Charities, NYC DEP, and Sewerage Treatment, American Airlines, and other major tenants at JFK International Airport. An interior designer who was part of the same networking group as Huerman claimed he left her unsettling voicemails, despite them never having worked together or met in person. He left these voicemails at the end of February, after she had finished her involvement with the group. Their connection was solely through the networking group. In February of 2022, while the task force was being set up to zero in on Huerman, he was invited on a YouTube realtor show, Bonjour Realty. It gives a glimpse into the personality of Rex Huerman as he described himself to Antoine Amira. His 18-minute interview shed some light on his personality and how he read up on building and administrative codes and kept a library of books that are considered obsolete. By June 12, 2023, the lab had proof that the mitochondrial DNA profiles from the male hair found on Megan Waterman and the DNA swab from the pizza were the same. This was an exact match to the scene of the crime and a first-hand sample of DNA, which provided them with a warrant. They could then move ahead and get their man. Detectives also believed that Heuermann had quite possibly slayed his victims inside his Massapequa Park home in Long Island, New York. His wife and children were also away visiting another state when he was carrying out such atrocities. After a lot of secrecy, they had enough to bring him in. There were confirmed reports of a soundproof secret chamber in the house, according to contractors who had worked there. Rex Heuermann also had more than 279 licensed weapons with 90 pieces of arms known to others. Quite a gun collection, and all the more reason to avoid risking a shootout. They had to be discreet and quick when arresting him. On July 23, 2023, he was walking on the sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan. Unbeknownst to him, plainclothes officers were surrounding him in an attempt to arrest him without resistance. To their surprise, Heuermann came almost willingly without any emotions. Not even surprised, he was just incredibly quiet. After his arrest, authorities arrived at his house in Massapequa Park to confiscate his electronic devices, which might contain crucial evidence. During this time, they also informed his wife and children about the charges. At the time of his arrest, his family was at home. As the police cars arrived with sirens blaring, Asa and her children were in shock and bewildered. Neighbors came out to witness the commotion, unable to believe that the seemingly ordinary architect next door, who worked a regular 9-to-5 job, was a dangerous individual. Although reports of a soundproof vault were debunked, authorities did find a large vault in the basement, secured with a heavy iron door. Inside, it contained a substantial cache of arms and ammunition, all belonging to Heuermann. It turns out, Rex Heuermann even had ties to Hollywood, as tweeted by famous actor Billy Baldwin. Tweet read, "Woke up this morning to learn that the Long Island serial perpetrator suspect was my high school classmate, Rex Heuermann." Suffolk County DA's office charged him with first-degree slaying and 3 counts of second-degree slaying. The victims whose tragedies he was charged with were the Gilgo Four, namely Melissa Barthélemy, 24, Megan Waterman, 22, Amber Lynn Costello, 27, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25. Court appearance ended with Heuermann pleading not guilty, but he was denied bail due to the gruesome nature of the crimes. He was placed under a watch that would prevent him from taking his own life. His family was plagued by reporters as they tried to come to terms with the morbid reality. His family was constantly filmed as they tried to gather their belongings from the house. It was likely that Heuermann took advantage of his family being out of town, committing the slayings each time they left. A theory is that he also tried to frame John Biltroff by ensuring his DNA was on at least 2 of the victims before copying his modus operandi and taking their lives. In short, setting him up. A week after his arrest, Asa Heuermann filed for divorce. The house was thoroughly searched for 2 weeks. A massive amount of evidence was uncovered. A planning document was found on a laptop in the Heuermann family home and appeared to have been created in 2000. The document had seemingly been edited as recently as 2002. In the document, 4 categories are listed: problems, supplies, DS, standing for dump site, and TRG, which is likely a reference to target. Under the category TRG, it is written that small is good, leading investigators to believe that he is referring to a victim's size. All the known victims thus far are all petite women, which is consistent with the small is good entry. The document then goes into further detail, with the categories pre-prep, prep, and post-event. Under each category, details like change tires and dispose of pics are written. Additionally, a separate section apparently details the steps taken to dispose of the body. Remove head and hands, remove marks from torture, and package for transport are included under the category labeled body prep. His intent was to locate these victims, to hunt them down, and to bring them under his control, and to then take their life. Criminal analysts believe that Heuermann conceivably took lives even after 2010. These were simply the victims that became publicly known. On June 7, 2024, Rex Heuermann was charged with 2 more slayings aside from the 4 that would get him prison time. Jessica Taylor and Sandra Costilla would finally get justice thanks to DNA tests. The hair lifted from their body was a positive match for Rex Heuermann's DNA. While he has pled not guilty, the evidence is unquestionable. He will be prosecuted for the atrocities he committed. Jasmine Robinson, Jessica's cousin who had been advocating for justice in the case, had the following to say after Heuermann was arrested in 2023. "We are very aware that this year marks 20 years of Jessica being gone. It is the same amount of time that she got to be alive before being taken from us in one of the most awful ways imaginable." She also then expressed hope that Heuermann's arrest may lead to a break in Jessica's case as well, which in 2024 it did. Jasmine also had the following to say: "Jessica was a person who was a true force. She had a huge heart, and she is incredibly loved and missed. She was an inspiration and somebody that I looked up to. She also had a feisty streak and would stand up for herself when necessary. She did not easily take disrespect."